There once was a poor woodsman and his wife that lived in a vast forest. They had 2 children, one older son named Hansel and a younger daughter named Gretel. They were so poor that they scarcely had enough provisions to provide for the 4 of them. And indeed, one year, things got so desperate that the father came to his wife and he brought the cold fact that they no longer had enough food to provide for all of them. And his wife said, "I know, and I have been thinking about this. There is only one thing that we can do. We must take the children into the forest, the deepest and thickest part, and there we'll build a fire for them, give them a little bread, but then we'll abandon them. They won't be able to find their way home, and we'll be free of our responsibility to feed them." "I cannot find it in my heart to do such a thing. What if the wild beasts of the forest eat them?" "You're a fool, an idiot. All of us will die then. You might as well build our 4 coffins now." But he could not argue the facts and the reality of the situation. And so finally, the husband agreed. Now, Hansel and Gretel were so hungry that they could not sleep, and they heard the whole conversation of their parents. Gretel was very disturbed, and she wept bitterly. "What are we going to do? The animals are going to eat us in the forest." Hansel tried to console her. "It's all right, sis. I will think of something." And when their parents had gone to sleep that night, Hansel crept out of the back door of the house into the moonlight and the starlight above. And he just said a little prayer to his God that he would help them. And while he did so, he noticed on the ground before him some flints, little rocks that were glimmering like little stars in the moonlight. And he thought, what a blessing from God. And he thanked the Lord for these stones, quickly picked them up, filled his pockets full, and went back into his bedroom, gave his little sis a kiss on the cheek. He said, "Gretel, not to worry. God is with us." Early the next morning, their parents got up even before sunrise. Their mother came into their room. "Get up, lazy bones. We're going out to chop wood today." She gave them each a small piece of bread to take with them, and she advised, "Do not eat that before lunch. I won't be giving you any more." And when everyone was ready, they all set out into the forest. And while they did so, Hansel kept looking back just to orient himself to where they were going, toward the house. His father said, "Hansel, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm just looking at that little white kitten up on the top of the roof, waving goodbye to us." "That is ridiculous," his mother said. "You're an idiot. That isn't a kitten. That's just the sunlight glinting off the chimney roof." Now Hansel knew it was not a kitten, but every time he stopped and turned around, he would discreetly drop one of his little stones that he found that night to mark the pathway. When they had reached the deep, thickest part of the forest, where the shadows were dark, their father instructed them to gather some wood up to make a fire. And when the fire was glowing warm in the cold shadows of the forest, the mother said, "You can rest here now and Your father and I will go down out into the forest and cut some wood down, and we'll be back for you." The two children thought they could hear their father's axe chopping at wood, but they were mistaken. It was just a broken, dry branch hanging in the wind. And at noon, they took their small pieces of bread and they began to and had their lunch. They grew tired, laid down next to the fire, and they fell asleep. It was a deep sleep, and when they woke up, it was nighttime. Gretel looked around. "Our parents have abandoned us." Every noise in the shadows of the forest to her was a lion or a bear or a wolf. "We're going to die," she said. Hansel said, "No, don't worry, Gretel. Wait until the moon rises, and we will find our way home." And sure enough, when the moon rose, the little stones that Hansel had dropped along the pathway began to glimmer like little candles, and all they had left to do was to follow them. They walked all that night, following the little trail of stones, until they reached their home in the morning. And of course their father rejoiced and was so happy to see them. He had regretted taking them in the forest. But the mother was secretly angry, and she scolded them for sleeping too long. Soon, however, their desperate condition did not improve, and very soon they were on their last half loaf of bread. And the mother one night came to the father and made him aware of this very cold fact. She said, "We must do what we did before. Only this time we'll take them further into a deeper part of the forest where they certainly will not be able to find their way home." "No," the father said, "I've changed my mind. I feel that it is better that we all die together of starvation than to abandon my children in the forest." And his wife began to scold him, ridicule him. "You're an idiot. You agreed to this before when we had less food, and now you're going back on your word when we have even less? It is ridiculous." And she continued to pester him until, well, he couldn't argue that they were about to starve. And he could not go back on his word from the previous time that he agreed. And so he said, "Fine, we will take him into the forest once again." Now the children again overheard the conversation, and Gretel was disturbed, and Hansel tried to console her. "Don't worry, Gretel, I will do just as we did before. I will go out and collect some stones so we can find our way home." But when the parents fell asleep, and Hansel tried to sneak out the back door, while the mother had locked all the doors of the house securely, and there was no way out, Hansel was worried. "What shall I do now?" he thought. He went back into Gretel, gave her a kiss, and said, "Gretel, do not worry. I know God has not forsaken us." But Hansel went to sleep worried that night. and a little afraid. Early the next morning, their parents woke up, and the wife came in. "Get up, lazy bones. We're going out to the forest to eat or to chop wood down. I will give you a small little morsel of bread to eat. But I advise not for you to eat that until lunchtime, or you will not get any more." Now this little piece of bread was even a smaller portion than what she gave them the time before. And when everyone was ready, they set off into the forest once again, only this time down a different path. But Hansel, every so often, would turn and orient himself to the house. And his father said, "Why do you stop and look back at the house, Hansel?" Hansel said, "I'm just looking at that little white bird waving goodbye to us on the roof." "Oh," the mother said, "you are a nitwit. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's not a bird. It's not a kitten. As I said before, it's the glint of the sunlight off the chimney. Now hurry along." They walked and they walked, this time deeper and deeper into the forest than either had ever been before. And when they got into a place where the father and the mother thought was far enough, they built a fire for the children to sit in the warmth of the cold shadows of the forest. And the mother said, "Stay here while we go cut wood, and we'll be back for you." They never came back. And at noon, along the pathway, Hansel had dropped little to mark the pathway. He had only in his pocket the one piece of bread that his mother had given him. And so along the pathway, he used that last piece of bread to drop little crumbs from it to help them find their way home. And so at lunchtime, he did not have a piece of bread to eat. And so Gretel said, "Hansel, here, you can have half of mine." She took half of her last bread and gave it to Hansel to eat. Then the two of them went to sleep that night, and they fell asleep. When they woke up, it was nighttime. And, of course, Gretel was greatly disturbed again, worrying that the wild animals would eat them. But Hansel said, "Don't worry. When the moon comes up, we'll see our way home." But when the moon came up, the little crumbs of bread that he had dropped along the way did not appear, for the birds in the forest had eaten them. But Hansel was confident that he could still find his way in the moonlight, and so away they went. "I think it's this way," Hansel said. But the more they walked, the less confident Hansel became. Is it this way? No, I think it's that way. No, it's this way." Soon it was evident that they were lost. The more they went, the deeper, farther into the forest they became. When morning came and the sun came up so they could see, they were nowhere that they were familiar with. They were lost. They continued on their way searching. They walked all that day until night. They were exhausted. Their bodies were tired, their feet blistered, and very hungry, for all they had to eat was a few wild berries that they had gathered along the way. So they did not want to carry on through the darkness, and they just lay down next to a tree and fell asleep. They slept all night long, and when they woke up, their bodies were sore. And Gretel did not want to move on, but Hansel prodded her and said, "Gretel, you must get up. If we don't go, there will be no hope for us. We will just lay here and die." So Gretel got up and she continued forward. But when both were at the brink of destruction, they saw a little white bird sitting up in on a branch ahead of them, and it was singing a very beautiful song. And they listened to this little greeting of the bird, and then it flew off down the pathway a little bit further, perched on another branch, and began to sing to them, as if it was saying, "Come, follow me." And so the two children found the energy to follow this little bird, until the bird found a clearing with a little home in it and perched itself right on top of the roof next to the chimney, and it began to sing. "Look at that, a house," the two children said, "with the little white bird on top." And the closer they got, the more astonished they became at this house. The walls were made of bread, the roof was made of cookies, and the glass window panes were made of sugar. They were starving. They ran to the house, began to tear into the walls, and began to binge on the food. And while they were eating, in one of the open windows they heard, "Nibble, nibble, little mouse, who is nibbling at my house?" "Never mind, it's just the wind," the children said. But soon, out of the front door emerged a little old lady. She had gray hair, she was short, and hunched over, using a crutch to help feel her way, for she had poor eyesight, with red eyes. Children were afraid. They hid the food in their hands behind their back. "Oh, dear children, oh, you're not in trouble? How did you ever find this place way out here? You must be hungry. Oh, please, please come in, and I will feed you something to eat." She reached her hand out, and the two children took her hand, and they were walked into the house. She sat them down at a table that was already prepared with plates and a full meal ready to serve. There were pancakes and syrups, and there were nuts and fruits to eat of all kinds, and the children were delighted. They ate until they were stuffed. And when they were finished, the old woman said, "I have 2 nice beds for you to rest and sleep in." She took them to the beds. They were pale and white. "Here are some beds that I've prepared for you." The two children lied in the 2 beds, and they felt so soft and comfortable. They felt like they were in heaven, and they fell into a deep, deep sleep. Now, this old woman, although she seemed to be an angel from heaven, was nothing of the sort. She was only pretending to be kind. In fact, she was an old witch, was wicked, and was almost as ferocious as a wolf. She had red, blurry eyes, but her sense of smell was as keen as a wolf's. And even long before the children found her house, she had sniffed them out. In fact, she had made the house with her black magic and had sent the white bird specifically to entice and lure them to her. And now she could see their rosy cheeks sitting or laying in their peaceful beds, and thought, oh, what plump little children for me to eat. The next morning she got up. She took Hansel by the hand and took him to the back stables, where she had a metal iron cage with bars that could not be bent. And she tossed him in the cage and locked it. And no matter how much he screamed to be free, she just laughed. She went back in to Gretel. Go fetch some water for your brother and fix him a dinner. I plan to fatten him up and eat him. Gretel was horrified. She wept and cried, but there was nothing she could do but do what this old lady said for her to do. And so she fetched him some water, and over the coming days she prepared meals for him to fatten him up. And all the while, in her heart, she was full of grief and sorrow. And all that she was able to eat was a few empty clam shells and dry bones. Now, the old woman every day would go to the cage to see if Hansel was getting more plump and fat for her to eat. But since she could not see very well, she would ask Hansel just to poke his little finger out between the bars of the cage so she could feel if he was fattening up. But Hansel did not poke his finger through the cage. Whenever she came, she would poke a little dry chicken bone out. And so day after day, when the witch had felt the little chicken bone, she was in wonder and amazement that he was not fattening up, but he was just as bony as he was the day she put him in there. And after 4 weeks of this, she became very impatient and frustrated. And one night she told Gretel, I'm going to eat your brother tomorrow morning, whether he's skinny or fat. Now, go get some wood so we can start the fire in the morning. Early the next morning, when Gretel got up, she was in tears and wept. She had prayed all night. Please help me, God. It would have been better for us to die in the forest. where we could have died at least together, than die like this." And the old witch said, "Spare me your lamentations. They're of no use to you now. God is not going to help you." She had prepared the hot oven, and she was kneading bread, the dough of the bread. "Why don't you just check the oven to see if it's the proper temperature? Go ahead, climb in there," she said. Gretel knew that if she did such a thing, the old woman would shut the door on her and bake her. So Gretel said, I don't know how. It doesn't look like the door's big enough for me to fit." "Ah, you're an idiot! It's ridiculous. The door is plenty big. It's big enough for me to get in. Look." And the old witch went over and stuck her head next to the door. And Gretel quickly gave her a shove, and she tumbled into the oven. Gretel slammed the iron door shut and locked it down. And when the woman started to howl and scream, she ran out, and she unlocked Hansel from his cage. "The old woman is dead," she said. "We're free." And Hansel jumped out of his cage like a bird, and they sang and they danced around and rejoiced that they had freed themselves from death. And now they were no longer afraid. They walked around the house, and in 4 corners of the house there were, in each corner, a little treasure chest of precious jewels. There were pearls and rubies and precious stones of all kinds. "These are a lot better than the little flint stones I found earlier," and the 2 of them filled up their pockets. And then Gretel said, "How are we going to get home? I think I know the way. I've been thinking about it since I've been in that cage. Follow me." And away they went. As they went down the pathway, however, they were led to a large river of water. It was deep. There were no stepping stones across it, and there was no bridge. The pathway had led them to a dead end. "Oh dear," they said, what will we do now?" Gretel said, "Look over there in the water. That's a duck. A duck that had flown in from a far distant land and was now swimming there in that river. It was a beautiful white duck. And Gretel said, "Duck, duck, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel, over here on the land. Stepping stones and bridge we lack. Please swim us over on your nice white back." The little duck paddled right over to them, and Hansel climbed upon his back, and he reached up for Gretel. Gretel said, "No, if I get on, it'll be too heavy and burdensome for that duck. You go along first, and then he'll come back for me." And so the ducks swam Hansel across, and then they come back and swam Gretel across. And the 2 were now safe across the river. And they felt refreshed and reinvigorated and inspired to go along through the forest. It seemed as if they were being led. And soon they recognized the familiar land. I remember this part of the forest, Hansel said. We're getting close. And finally, they could see their house. They ran to the front door of the house and went inside where their father was at the kitchen table, his head down. He was very sorrowful, but when he saw them, he jumped up and he ran to them and he hugged them. And in tears, he said, I'm sorry. I regret every day that I left you in the forest. Please forgive me. He said, your mother has died, and there has not been a day that I have been able to sleep since you've been gone, for I have been full of grief and sorrow. And the children said, do not worry, Father. All will be well now. And they took out from their pockets the precious jewels and spread them out on the table. Look what we have. And from that day forward, they were no longer ever in need of food. They had all that they needed and more. They were blessed and prospered. The end. Hansel and Gretel.